Welcome to the American Institute of Stress's official podcast, Finding Contentment. The goal of this podcast is to highlight new information about stress and stress management techniques. While we understand that stress is a very personalized issue and different for everyone, we hope to help you find your own way to contentment.
Hey, greetings everyone. Welcome back to Finding Contentment. This is your host and Executive Director for the American Institute of Stress, Will Heckman. I want to thank you once again for joining us. Hopefully you guys have been joining us in all our past podcasts and also our future podcasts. If you haven't and you're joining us for the very first time, you should know that this podcast focuses on stress and stress-related issues. And if you have a moment, send in some comments, send in some reviews. I love hearing from you guys. Just go to stress.org and you can contact me. You know, at our mission at AIS is to improve the mental and physical health of the community and the world by setting the standard of excellence of stress management and education, research, clinical care, home life, and your workplace. And we educate and credential healthcare professionals and other products and educational tools for everyone. We also publish two magazines. One is called Contentment, and the other is Combat Stress, which focuses more for vets and first responders. But we need your help. We need your help to carry out our mission with a donation. The Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and your tax-deductible gift allows us to continue helping you along with service members, first responders, as I mentioned, and civilians, to navigate stressful situations and just to have a happier, more rewarding life. And every dollar is greatly appreciated. There are really easy ways to donate. You can make an online donation at stress.org. You can start a Facebook fundraiser, send a check, give us a call. Pretty soon we're going to start taking Bitcoin. Anything you want, we need your help. And by donating to the American Institute of Stress annually, you help support, strengthen, and sustain our legacy of science-based stress management and education. And speaking of education, I hope you've all had a chance to look at our new documentary, Mismatched, Your Brain Under Stress, because it is now available. Mismatched is a revolutionary documentary series exploring stress in our society and what we can do about it. Stress is literally the spice of life. It has been said, if you don't experience stress, you're not alive. And stresses are everywhere. They come at you from the environment you live, work, and play in, from other people, and mostly from inside your own mind. Stress is defined as our reactions to change. And like everything else, you can learn how to master your stress to live a more peaceful, productive, and happy life. Mismatched, Your Brain Under Stress, well, we'll tell you how to do that. It's produced by the American Institute of Stress, and it's a 6-part documentary by Justin Smith and features some of the world's leading experts on stress. By the way, our guest is one of those. And their collective experience stretches from the first experiments done on the mind-body connection to the latest research into unraveling the unconscious mind. And as entertaining as it is informative, Mismatched teaches us about what stress is and how to master it. Also, right now for colleges and corporate viewing, the institutional packages now include lesson plans and quizzes and assessments. So all you have to do, go to stress.org and find out how you can see it. We're talking today about the role of emotions in stress. You know, everyone encounters a variety of stress events in their daily life. If those stressful events are dealt with inappropriately, well, there will be a high probability of producing a series of negative consequences. There have been many studies that show that psychological stress responses often involve negative emotions. In other words, people experience a complex array of negative emotions such as depression, anxiety, anger, and stress during real-life stressful events. That's not something new. Those negative emotions very often lead to much poorer health or health issues. And poor emotional health can weaken your body's immune system, a topic we're all talking about these days. This makes you more likely to catch colds and other infectious diseases during emotionally difficult times. Also, when you're feeling stressed, anxious, or upset, you may not take care of your health as well as you should. I know that when I'm stressed, I don't feel like exercising, and I usually eat stuff that's, well, mostly bad for me. Notoriously, it's ice cream. Some people feel so bad that they may even stop taking the medication that their doctor prescribes. And a feeling of stress, sadness, or anxiety are causing physical problems. Keeping these feelings inside can make you feel worse. It's okay to let your loved ones know when something is bothering you. However, keep in mind that your family and friends, well, they may not always be able to help you deal with your feelings appropriately. They're not trained. At these times, ask someone outside the situation for help. Try asking your doctor, a counselor, or even a religious advisor for advice and for some support to help you improve your emotional health. Today, we're going to be talking about the role that emotions play in our stress. And I've invited a world-renowned expert on stress and neuroscience, Dr. Evian Gordon. Dr. Gordon is the founder and chairman and chief medical officer of Total Brain. He is considered one of the world's top neuroscientists. He also founded the largest standardized international brain database, which helps us to discover what insights and behavioral habits are most effective in mental health, wellness, and peak performance. He has authored over 300 peer-reviewed scientific publications. He's a recipient of the inaugural Royal Society Eureka Prize for Interdisciplinary Scientific Research. He published the very first book on integrative neuroscience. It was titled Integrative Neuroscience, Bringing Together Biological, Psychological, and Clinical Models of the Human Brain, which of course can be found, like everything else on our planet, on Amazon. He also hosts a really fascinating podcast called the Total Brain Podcast Series, and you can find that easily by searching for it. His other passion, which is very interesting to me, and I took time out to look at it, is abstract art. And you can see his art at brainsiteart.com. It's really awesome, and I really enjoyed looking at it. And also, if you want to learn more about Total Brain, go to totalbrain.com. I'm sure we'll go over all of this with Evian, but please join me in welcome Dr. Evian Gordon. Evian, thank you for taking the time. I couldn't go on with all the things you've accomplished because I'd probably go away with an inferiority complex. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Will. It's really a great pleasure to be with you.
The first thing I wanted to talk to you about, Evian, you've been a leader in the stress management field for quite a while now. And I was wondering if you could give us a little background on how you got started and how that all led to Total Brain.
Yeah, well, just in essence, Will, I had the privilege of being brought up going through the science degrees, and particularly biology and zoology, and then did a PhD in serum lipids in the heart, and then did medicine. And it was just such an amazing 15 years of kind of immersive study, and there was so much detail. And I loved it. But when I discovered the big patterns, for example, with Darwin's amazing insights about how to bring the interconnections between all species, and that sort of has been carried over, of course, to all plants, it blew me away because the details are kind of a bit overwhelming initially, but when they have a framework of how the essence of them is interconnected, like Darwin's little picture of the little tree, little picture scribble that just said it all, it's all interconnected. We all come from a common ancestor. It was just, I thought, that's what I want to do. I'm not going to be the usual science that my BSc, honors, master's, PhD, medical degree, it sort of pushed me towards the specialization was the most sort of valued dynamic. And in many ways it is. We would be nowhere without those amazing scientists who do wonderful, detailed, siloed, phenomenal research. But occasionally we get an opportunity to put the pieces together. And so I was lucky enough, Will, to in 1982 in Australia be offered a position to head a applied integrative neuroscience facility called Brain Dynamic Center, and that's really where my where I was just given the ability in this largest hospital in the Southern Hemisphere in Sydney, Westmead Hospital, to sort of use my amazing education, privileged education, which was in South Africa at the University of Witwatersrand with the most amazing teachers and opportunities to apply that and link to people in Washington who were part of the Human Brain Project, Dr. Stephen Koslow in particular. So that was the journey, and then just simply that setting up this international database on the brain to really try and distill what were some of the big patterns about the brain and about stress, because when in my PhD in serum lipids, it was fascinating to me that the Framingham study, which is kind of like the greatest study in medicine ever, stress wasn't as well elucidated as the other risk factors that were found for cardiac disease and for stroke, serum lipids, blood pressure, diabetes, smoking. And so I've always had this sense that there are some big issues like stress that underpin all the factors in health and in mental illness. And that sort of led me towards towards Total Brain, which is a company. I'm speaking to you from San Francisco now. Most of our executives and the team are in Australia and some in Sydney. In America, I mean, across the country, some in Sydney. But essentially, it's to apply those insights to corporates and mainly with a mental health focus. So a lot of clinical groups as well. And it's just become an amazing enterprise and scaled beyond my imagination, to be honest, when I started. So that's the snapshot sort of essence of where my background was and how it landed up with this applied online mental health platform that is Total Brain.
That's really fascinating that you found that connection between everything, and a lot of maladies have to do with stress. I've heard this before, that people they wasn't paid attention to as it should have been, as at least on a level it should have been. I think that's changing a little bit now. Yeah. For those of you who are listening, Dr. Gordon was also one of the stars of our documentary, as I mentioned before, which is called Mismatched. And in that documentary, you spoke about many things. But one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, and you touched on a little bit, was the relationship between stress and emotion. And I guess we all kind of know there's a connection there, but can you tell us a little bit about that more in depth, that relationship?
So yeah, that's a spot on observation, Will, because what I was saying is that what I call E-stress, emotion stress, and there's a reason for that. So the beautiful documentary, by the way, Mismatched, and what an amazing quick summary of the history of stress, this most fundamental driving factor in health and mental health in particular, but all health actually. So that was brilliant. That was an amazing series. And so what I really was just flagging was that the neuroscience has focused very much on this beautifully presented part in the documentary, which was that we get we basically get these threats. The brain is about safety first. So stress is there to kind of initially help us deal with safety. It's really helpful, use stress, good stress. And then when it becomes chronic, of course, as we all know, it's distress and pretty toxic. So we all know that. But the science, has also very much focused in the last 30, 40 years, and it's actually since the beginning of stress as such a major force, on this balance between our fight-flight system, the system that sort of is our automatic stress reaction, and the calm, flexible system, so-called vagus system. And beautiful science, incredibly elegant detail, and very well resolved. And many of the solutions address how to switch on the calm, flexible part of our nervous system and switch off the fight flight, which is sort of activated by the amygdala, our alarm system in the brain, that there's a threat. switch off, you deal with it. And of course, it's great for in the moment, but it's not so great when it becomes chronic. And now in a complex world, we were conditioned in kind of rather simplistic ways to deal with stress. It used to be because the world has become so much more complex. And the triggers for threat are no longer just physical, but social. So therefore, it sort of started to open the window as to what was actually driving those hijacks. Where were they coming from? And of course, we all know that they come from our non-conscious emotions. We have very little control over the single most dominant process in our brains and in our lives, emotions. Now, the reason that science could not fully deal with this is we just simply don't have the tools or the theoretical understanding of how in a fifth of a second, non-consciously, we're sort of aware of it, but not in control of it. We get these hijacks. Like, seriously, what's going on? A regretful thought, an anticipatory stress of uncertainty can kill our ability to be in the moment and live our life to the full because we hijacked by these processes. So I suppose what began about 30 years ago, we were part of one of the teams that began to use the emerging technology that could measure the brain. We had these 30 laboratories around the world where we could start to measure in a very sophisticated way rapid speed processing in the brain. And we were one of the groups that opened the door to study the non-conscious brain for real, in real time, like in fractions of a second. And we're one of the groups that saw that it was astounding how the brain processed fear faster than any other emotion, about 30 milliseconds, that 30,000th of a second. I mean, it's so fast. And then we started to see that there was a way to at least begin with some better awareness of the central triggers of our stress, of the amygdala, fight, flight, so-called hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, where the adrenal secreting cortisol. So, it's cortisol is like very toxic over a long period of time. So we knew that there was a sort of almost like an initial trigger. So we started to look at and understand those emotions better. And that has continued well to this day. There are real opportunities now to expand our understanding and provide sort of more integrative theory as applied integrative neuroscientists. That's what our global consortium tries to do. We try to put the big picture together, the pattern, but be super respectful of the details. And that time has arrived. So we now are looking and have a group where, work with a number of scientists around the world, our chief scientist, Dr. Donna Palmer, and the Heidi Hanna, who has been very involved with the American Institute of Stress, of course, very good, great integrationist herself, but also people like in heart rate variability, Dick Gevirtz, Julian Thayer, Paul Lara, Travis Wild. I mean, our job is to bring together now some of the leading scientists around the world who can shed light and make at least our appreciation of emotion more explicit. And even the appreciation, awareness of it is half the battle. That don't panic when you get hijacked. If you can, start building a go-to strategy as to how to build on it, use it, have better control of it based on reframing, based on nudging. You can nudge little positive things. There's a lot of strategic smarts that are emerging now around the world to how to put a lens, not just on in general what you can do with stress, or build a kind of new stress habit of meditating more and sleeping better and mindfulness and all the things that were wonderfully in Mismatched, the long list of things. But also we can start focusing on what do we do in 1 second with one thought. How do we deal with it? What's our go-to strategy that works for us? And that's the essence of where I believe that the science of e-stress is beginning to emerge.
You make two really good points. and you said some things that I hope everybody paid attention. One was you used the word hijack. And it's really, in essence, what happens to us. Our thoughts our emotions can hijack us and make us react in different ways. And you were talking about what our thoughts can do to us. It is said that we have somewhere between, I don't know, 30 and 70,000 thoughts a day. And for a lot of people, so I've heard, sometimes I'm included with them, most of those thoughts tend to be negative. Let me ask you, do you think that humans are just hardwired to think negatively? And if they are, can we really change that? Is it just evolution? Before you mentioned the fight flight syndrome, well, evolutionary, that was great in the beginning when that was an acute response to something, but you also talked about when it becomes chronic. Now social media stresses us out there. I don't think that was the plan when whoever designed this did so, but are we hardwired in one way to think negatively?
Oh, there's no doubt about it, Will. So that is absolutely the spot on key point, and that is that because safety first is the key organizing principle of the brain. And coming back to where I started to see this as I went through the science world, and unfortunately I'm sort of regretful of it now, but I dissected many animals and brain blueprints, and you see the blueprint in the brain. There are about 4 times as many networks in the brain for negative than for positive processing. Now, why? It's because if safety first is our primary organizing principle, and it seems like it is, then protecting ourselves against threat is number 1, number 2, and number 3. And so, yes, it is. And I'll tell you 2 other pieces of evidence, other than just the hard evidence of this amazing blueprint of the brain and the body. It's just incredibly straightforward and amazingly elegant how the blueprint is there and how the brain switches on the fight-flight system and also can alternative switch on the calm flexible. The second piece of evidence is that if you just think of even memory, well, most memory, as everybody knows, we have a sort of structure in the brain that converts short-term to long-term memory called the hippocampus. And it's beautifully elegant. Memory in itself is an elegant journey in the brain. But when we have traumatic memories, emotionally negative memories, they do not primarily go through the hippocampus. They go through the amygdala. And there is just another snippet, Will, of the evidence that there is a different pathway for negativity. And not only that it goes through the amygdala, so it gets sort of prioritized through there, but it gets consolidated more, it gets wired more intensely. And that is one of the reasons why we remember negative memories better and for longer and more consistently than positive ones, and why we are so risk averse as a basic innate piece. And those are sort of, there are many other pieces of evidence, but it is a very fundamental reality, it seems, that we are wired that way. But the converse, Will, because you said it seems like, well, if that's the case, what can we do? But the good news is that the brain is also very plastic, neuroplasticity. So with targeted, strategic assessment and training and tracking, which is the basis of Total Brain, is to put all of that together in one platform with a disciplined way of using that, rather than just a sort of info dump of information. There are 10,000 health tech apps out there, many of them driven a triumph of marketing over substance and driven by engineers rather than by people who have an integrative insight into the neuroscience, into the science of behavior. But with those insights deployed very strategically to yourself, finding what works for you, you can really change, for real, change that one thought in the moment in 1 second, and then expand that model to just get a better strategic way of dealing with these fractions of a second hijack that seem to come out of nowhere. Well, they don't, They're very plausibly, they have their there for a reason, and we can sort of befriend them to some degree. Better than, I certainly know for myself, better. I mean, the difference between having this insight and some tools, and I was born a pretty negative guy. Negativity, by the way, is pretty genetic. And it took me a long time to actually find my threshold of what's authentic for me, but with a framework and with other people I've worked with who tell me the same thing. You find what works for you. Some people are more forgiving. Some people remember the people that traumatized them and want to hold on to that a little bit in some ways. Other people are just more evolved, and I'm happy to be not one of those people, but can just forgive everybody for everything. So we find our threshold, and we work with it. And it's very real what we can change. So that is the converse of this kind of harsh reality that we are wired for negativity.
I think a lot of people, though, are going to be very happy to hear that. A lot of people feel like their negative thoughts are just, like you said, hardwired, and we can't do anything about it. But neuroscientists, if you're listening, guys, neuroscientists are working on it. There is something you can do about it. The brain, you can change the way you feel and the way you think and the process that you deal with things. And that's exciting news. I think a lot of people will be very happy to hear that, and don't give up. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And when we talk about negative stress, the one thing that people always ask me about, and it's so true, they ask me questions like, well, how many negative people does it take to ruin a meeting? It's really one. And because negative stress is so contagious, and I've always found that very fascinating. It's happened to me. I was an educator for many years, and God knows one student can ruin a class. Is positive stress, like being excited about something, also contagious? Is it as contagious?
Oh, it's another great question. Well, great questions. So the answer
I'm
is
curious.
Look, they are both contagious. Let me try and share with you my thoughts about why I think negative contagion is stronger. But they're both fantastically contagious. A positive vibe and a positive energy is great. But it is so interesting what you're saying, one person. So we work with a lot of corporates at Total Brand, like 40, and for many years, we've also worked with a lot of executive coaches, and we work with peak performance groups. And I often ask leaders or coaches, how many people does it take to ruin the dynamic of your team, your executive team, your company, your performance team? And it's funny, Will, because within 1 second, they put up their finger and they go, one. And I then ask them, how is that possible? That one strong negative person can change the entire dynamic. Everybody feels like they're walking on eggshells. Why? Well, it would seem that they are coming back. There are two reasons. Coming back to, firstly, this issue that we are primed for negative threats, things that are going to really threaten our future or magnify our regrets of our past, get dominance. And so that's why we need strategies to deal with that. So when somebody comes along and they're a bit of a megaphone for negativity, they're louder, they say it more often, or they have very subtle strategic ways to say it. I'll tell you one that I observed many times in corporate settings that blows my mind to this day, which is that you can be in a meeting, positive, people are going to do a brainstorm, and a negatively biased, strongly negatively biased person will right up front at the beginning of the meeting start off with a false, what I call a kind of a sort of compliment sandwich. Oh, I love this, this what we're doing, I love this. But then they'll say two critical words that'll paralyze everybody. But, or I'm concerned. Now, my personal experience of watching many meetings that are designed to try and brainstorm, look, when that happens too early, I mean, you don't want to remove the critical analysis from anything, but you want to leave it to the end, because when that happens too early, you can go home. Everybody's in conscious thinking, trying to impress mode, and the entire dynamic of possibility thinking has been suffocated, because we all pick up these cues, and in the deepest recesses of our brain, we are worried there's always a basis in fact, or usually when someone says something negative, there's always they're not just making it up. They're often smart analysts or stuff like that, where they just mean well, actually, trying to protect everyone. But they're not possibility thinking people. So when you put that in, or people who are negative in the face of a team that's competing, it doesn't take much. So we are wired in the ways that I described, from our negative, 4 times negative pathways, amygdala memory, but also a second piece, Will, which is mirror neurons. We also seem to have in our brains a network of, there's so much social brains have evolved in the last 5 million years as humans, from, Australopithecus to Homo habilis to Homo erectus to us. That's just 5 million years. We trebled in brain size. No other species has done that. But much of that in humans has also been socialization, cooperative. So there's a lot of scope for positivity, but we need to use that. And so mirror neurons are there to basically reflect back. When somebody gives us a nod, we automatically nod. We don't even know why. So, but of course the opposite. So that's where the positive contagion works greatly. But also, unfortunately, if somebody's shaking their head and folding their arms, our mirror neurons in our brain activated and add to this previous, wiring issue. And so in balance, I would think, and my observation and the data seems to point that negative contagion is more dramatic, more, especially if it's a catastrophizer triggering it, harder to deal with. And positive contagion can still be fantastic. And understanding the difference between both and building strategies of how to deal with both can be super helpful. And just last point, I'll tell you how we often have helped people deal with it, is when you know in advance who the most catastrophizing people are. One of the common ways now that I see people who at least have the knowledge about this will go up to that person and say, Henry, whatever, look, we really think you're the smartest person in the room. We'd love you to speak last and give us a summary of all the problematic things you found, and if you found any positive ones, and what is your solution to them. And those two things of getting the most negative people to speak last and also speak about their solutions rather than just their magnification of problems have been 2 ways, well, that I've seen that really smart leaders deal with this kind of challenge.
I've dealt with group dynamics for a long time in different situations, and that's exactly right. If you know somebody has a tendency to be that negative distractor of what you're about to say, is one of the great solutions to that is to try and get them on your team beforehand. Try to get them as be.
Yeah, well, good luck on that one. Good luck on that one. My view is the evidence is also that very negative people remain negative and they try all sorts of strategies, but eventually, it doesn't take much to say, but I'm concerned, fold your arms, and also voice tonality. People can just communicate a negative voice frequency, and the brain is so attuned to voice frequency. So, yep, if you can do that, that's great. But that's why priming works often, but it only works for certain types of people. So it's a wonderfully interesting dynamic, and it's a very interesting lesson about, what do we own ourselves in all of this? It's a very wonderful lesson about self-reflection as well as where do we stand in terms of these kinds of issues. And often I do it myself when I'm really annoyed or feel misunderstood or kind of worse. It just pops out and I go, what? You know about this stuff. Why would you do it? It's just hard to control sometimes.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny, but negative stress is so much easier to catch. And I've always found that when someone was giving a lesson or telling me about something, the positive stress, their excitement about it is not as contagious unless it's really genuine.
That's so
you can just say, yeah, but, and sort of just put it out there, and it'll be, people will catch that right away. But if you have a positive statement, but you don't really feel it, people may not pick that up and they may not catch that positive feeling. So It's a very interesting part of this discussion, and we could talk about just that for a long time. But I wanted to ask you about one of the other things that you mentioned, and that was that stress can cause a misalignment with ourselves, and I thought that was very interesting. And I was hoping you could explain that a little bit further, talk about that a little bit, because being misaligned is such a good way to put it, the way people are feeling right now and the way people are reacting to a lot of what's going on right now.
Yeah. So, it's very interesting, well, that hopefully what I'm trying to communicate is there's a common thread here with stress, with the emotion and triggering the stress. So there are these dynamic forces, of the negative and the positive. But similarly with misalignment, the core of the core is this non-conscious emotion and our rational cognition. So the core of the core is really emotion and our rational thinking, cognition. And when that is aligned, in other words, when you, and your beautiful example of authenticity, when you feel that what others are saying is authentic, reflected in their voice tonality, in their body language, in the content of what they're saying, but also in their intentionality, that they are truly being constructive and possibility thinking. If that is aligned with the rational details of implementation and how does this work? Let's be realistic about what will work, when will it work, what's the path to market, or how do we beat this team? What is the strategic issues? When those two things come together and match, boom, everything flows like a flow state, writ large. Now, similarly that's in team dynamics. Similarly with inside of ourselves, if we have thoughts that are non-consciously, emotionally, we are fearful about regrets of our past or fears of our future, and we can't be present. But rationally, we know what we want to achieve. The goal is there. We want to get there. We want to be collaborative. We want to be, disciplined and focused and get there. If there is a mismatch between that emotion, the emotion cauldron, and our rational thinking, that is the core motherlode misalignment. We can try and fudge it over, but it is going to pop out, because now the hijack is coming from within, and that is the motherlode. That is why it is all begins with an inside job. It begins with ourselves, whether it's self-empowerment, whether it's us in our relationships, in our self-peace, at work, begins with ourselves. And as harsh as that is, and as hard as that is, whenever I look at every dynamic, I first try and start with myself, because we can so easily, confirmation bias and rationalize anything. And so then it makes it a little easier to see others with a slightly less judgmental lens. So that is the big kind of, insight that I saw about alignment. It is absolutely fundamental, but it begins in our own brains.
Yeah, it's so true that, when we are aligned, we talked about, having 60, 70,000 thoughts a day, and if 80% of them are negative, imagine how much better we'd feel, first of all, about ourselves if we just got that down to 50%. What a great improvement that would be. But even in a global view, how much better you'd feel about everyone else. That was a really good point. And when you start feeling better about everyone else, I bet your stress levels go down too.
Absolutely. And just to keep the thematic on that stress idea, well, if we could, and I love your idea of changing 50%, but imagine if we felt first and foremost that we could change one. Now, if you feel comfortable, how did I change, like to give a very common example, how did I change my not being reactive to criticism? It's a very common one I get asked to deal with people. Can you help me? I get super reactive to criticism. So people ask me often, like that's an example, how do you change one thought of one thing, the self-confidence, the calmness, the better, the sense of what's called self-efficacy that people now feel, even with one type of thought, one thought, that they're starting to turn the corkscrew the other way, the cycle of decline of reactivity. So I just would love to just keep emphasizing that one point, the main point. I think the brain is about timing as well as about concept. And if we can just deal with one thing in 1 second, in the moment, to reframe it in, find strategies to reframe it right now, then I think a lot of the cascade, the domino effect begins the other way.
That's a really good point. It's the journey of 1,000 miles, right? Begins with one first step. Yeah, one thought, and like you say, can cascade into us having just a better mental health outlook for ourselves and everyone else. All right, so this was very interesting. We could talk a lot about all that you've said. It is not a discussion that can go on for a half hour. We're talking about something that takes a lot of focus and a lot of thought. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Total Brain app that you're involved with, because it's a way for people to help themselves get to that point, help themselves deal with that. And I didn't want to talk about it because you're the expert, and I've read about it and I thought it was really fascinating. Tell us about that. Tell us what it can do for people.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I don't want to turn this into an advert. I just want to really summarize very briefly the essence is sort of like a distillation of everything we've discussed. So out of the emergence of the database and this world's biggest stress database, so this just focuses on stress. So if we take this, we have the world's biggest stress international database. What does that mean? It means that we can look at the interconnections between everything we've discussed. How does stress affect the fight, flight versus vagus? How is stress and emotions connected? How does stress derail memory, focus, planning? What's the relationship between stress and mental health? And that is one of the things we're doing. So we are, I think, in the Total Brain platform, this integrative platform that is brought together for mental health focus to be able to sort of self-monitor. So assessment is fundamental. Quick assessments, the longest ones take 20 minutes, but the shortest ones can take a few minutes. And also measuring heart rate variability. So we can measure objectively what is our state at the moment of our stress. So self-monitor and track. You don't measure it, you can't manage it. But also self-control. What are the tools that can help us deal with stress? So for example, every tool in our toolbox, and there are over 50, comes from a well-established scientific discipline. They're not just a bunch of tools. As I said, so 10,000 apps up there. Some of them are fantastic technologically. Ours focus on science-driven insight. What's an example? Everybody knows that breathing slowly, as the wonderful Herbert Benson showed, that just repetition of a stimulus. I mean, that series number 2, for those of you who are watching Mismatched who haven't, it is game-changing. Just the idea that Herbert Benson, this wonderful man, this wonderful cardiologist at Harvard, he showed that just repetition of a stimulus can break your current thoughts, basically. The relaxation response. I mean, he demystified so many things in that little program. And that program's only 20 minutes long, but he was just genius. And so to me, that idea in Total Brain, that everything we do, we take like the Herbert Benson insights of the essence of the brain. And everybody knows that breathing slowly is good for you, but we also have added the additional science that breathing at 6 breaths per minute is particularly good at switching off your stress response. And the tool there is called, resonant breathing. And then there are other beautiful breath tools in there, mindfulness tools, but also tools to help you deal with your negative thoughts, cognitive behavior therapy tools called Thought Tamer. And then, of course, the mindfulness industry has been wonderful in terms of what they have elucidated. And we have wonderful tools from the Art of Living, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, sort of a spiritual, but yet also practical for the secular people in meditation. We are, we are agnostic. We're an integration company. So we look at the evidence, the tools, and then, of course, last but not least, positivity, nudging positivity, the entire nudge industry. And why that's important, and why I'll end on that one, Will, is because we underestimate that in this 85 billion highly interconnected neurons, trillions of connections between our ears, this cosmos, it's like throwing a pebble into the water. We can change that chemistry in a fraction of a second with a nudge, a little positivity nudge. So some of the training tools might seem simple on the surface. They're not infotainment. They're not designed to be like, fancy entertainment tools. They are deliberately designed to rewire stress, or in this case, stress, but the other things, any mental health condition, support is not a clinical tool, it is a support platform. And so I'll end off by saying this, Will. What has been a great privilege for me to now become linked to the American Institute of Stress. And this is my first podcast with you, but I really appreciate the opportunity because, with the American Institute of Stress, we can now converge some data and evidence to share for example, a stress reduction online sort of opportunity. But also we work with the American Heart Association to bring that stress back in more forcefully into the Framingham Type Deep Insights. So those kinds of opportunities now exist. And last but by no means least, the insights and the assessments are critical, but so are the tools. If you don't rewire it, if you don't create a new habit, everyone's in the infotainment business, and we certainly are not. It is about specifically, how do we bring all these tools that were mentioned on Mismatched, all the tools for reframing and for curiosity and for mindfulness, and all the other issues that were mentioned of gratitude and healthy stress-related eating and exercise, but also these new technological tools, the tools that are to do with biofeedback, neurofeedback, to retrain the brain automatically. Alpha-STIM, of course, your amazing president of the American Institute of Stress, Dr. Daniel Kirsch. I mean, an amazing outcome there in neurostimulation, pinging the brain through the earlobes at 10 cycles per second. So all of these opportunities now exist to be able to test them and look at the before and after assessments using Total Brain to see what works best, in whom, and personalize what people can help people find what works best for them. And I think that's my my Total Brain summary.
Well, thank you. That was great. And you know what, people, if you're listening, this is not 1950 anymore. Welcome to the 21st century. The science that deals with our mental health has come a long way, and we need to embrace some of that. You can do something about it. There's a lot of things you can do to alleviate your stress, line yourself. But the one thing you should never do is do nothing, because if you do nothing, nothing will change. Um, the Total Brain app is one of those newest tools that you need to go look at. It's at totalbrain.com. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us, Evian. I know that we hardly covered a third, a tenth of what we should, but people should also know they can find your book on Amazon. And again, go to totalbrain.com, but also look for the Total Brain podcast. You can search it, you can find it. It's probably on all the platforms that this podcast is on. It's fascinating to listen to it. You don't have to be in the neuroscience business. We all own a brain. We all need to know how to make it function better and make ourselves feel a lot better. So again, Evian, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time. All right,
Thank
everybody.
you so much, Will. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's going to be it for today. This is your host, Will Heckman. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Hey, don't forget to please follow this podcast. And like I said in the beginning, you can send in a review, send in a comment. Like hearing from you guys. And again, we need your support because your support helps make these podcasts possible. And I want to remind everyone, just as I said before, just as stress is different for each of us, there's no one stress reduction or management strategy that is right for everyone. So that means you have to join us next time. So when we explore more stress management strategies and insights, and remember to visit stress.org so you can gather information, tools, and techniques to live a healthier and happier and longer life. And I hope the information you heard from Dr. Gordon and myself today will help you to find contentment. Good day, everyone.